At 72, Samuel Hill had seen the world change in ways that sometimes felt both thrilling and daunting. Time had a way of slipping past him, and with each passing year, the simple pleasures seemed to take on greater significance. For Samuel, one of those pleasures was his car. For 2 decades, he had driven the same old sedan, a reliable, no-frills car that had taken him through countless trips, from visiting his children to running errands around town. It wasn't glamorous, but it had been enough. Until now. For years, Samuel had saved up every penny, putting aside a portion of his modest pension and earnings from his work as a retired engineer. He had resisted indulgences, avoided luxuries, and built up a small but comfortable nest egg. His wife, Eleanor, had always supported his cautious approach to money, believing in the value of discipline and patience. "Good things come to those who wait, Samuel," she had often said. And so, after years of scrimping and saving, today was the day that Samuel would buy something for himself. A brand new, gleaming luxury sedan. Samuel had spent months researching the best vehicles, consulting with his children, and carefully weighing his options. The choice was clear. He had his heart set on the Model X, a $120,000 luxury car with all the bells and whistles. It represented everything he had worked for in his later years, a symbol of his hard work, his sacrifices, and the love he had shared with Eleanor. Samuel had always been frugal, but today he was ready to indulge in a reward for a life well lived. As Samuel entered Prestige Motors, a high-end dealership nestled in a wealthy part of the city, he couldn't help but feel a wave of excitement. The showroom was immaculate, its marble floors polished to a high sheen, reflecting the sleek curves of luxury cars parked in neat rows. It felt like a place where dreams were made, and for once, Samuel was there to make his own. He was dressed in a simple but well-tailored suit, his shoes polished, and his silver hair neatly combed. While he wasn't dressed in the latest designer attire, he carried himself with a quiet dignity. Samuel had always believed that his worth wasn't defined by appearances, but by the character he showed in the way he lived his life. He approached the first car he laid eyes on, a glistening Model X, and for a moment, he allowed himself to imagine driving it, the wind in his hair, the soft leather seats cradling him in comfort. A young salesman in a sharp, expensive suit approached him with a bright, almost rehearsed smile. The man's name tag read Ryan, and he had the air of someone who was accustomed to dealing with wealthy clientele. His smile faltered slightly as he gave Samuel a once-over, scanning his attire with a quick, almost imperceptible flick of his eyes. There was a certain arrogance in his gaze, as though he had already sized up Samuel and decided what kind of person he was. "Can I help you, sir?" Ryan asked, his voice polite, but laced with a tone that suggested he wasn't entirely interested in Samuel's answer. Samuel took a deep breath, trying to ignore the brief flash of discomfort he felt under Ryan's judgmental stare. "Yes," he said, pointing to the Model X. "I'm interested in that car." Ryan's smile widened, but there was something condescending about it. He glanced over at a colleague standing nearby, sharing a look that Samuel didn't miss. The way Ryan's eyes flickered with subtle mockery stung, but Samuel chose to remain composed. He had dealt with people like this before. He'd spent his life earning respect, not by flaunting wealth, but by living with integrity and kindness. He wouldn't let this young man diminish his dream. Ryan's voice dropped a notch, his tone shifting. "The Model X starts at $120,000, sir," he said, barely suppressing a smirk. "Perhaps I can show you something more. Appropriate? We have some excellent used cars, Toyotas, Hondas, much more in line with, well, your budget." Samuel's face flushed at the implication, but he kept his voice steady. "I know the price. I would like to test drive it, please." Ryan let out a soft, almost inaudible snicker, exchanging a glance with his colleague. "We don't allow test drives without proof of funds," Ryan said, his voice now dripping with condescension. "We don't want to waste time on window shoppers." Samuel's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly what Ryan was implying. The dealership's clientele was wealthy, and Samuel didn't fit the profile. The laughter from a few other employees nearby, who had clearly gathered to watch the exchange, didn't make things any easier. The humiliation burned, but Samuel refused to give in to it. He had worked hard for this moment, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it away from him. Before he could respond, a man in a sharp suit appeared from the back office. His name tag read Paul Stevens, and he walked with the swagger of someone who had spent his career running the show. Samuel instinctively straightened his back, trying to maintain the dignity he had always carried with him. "What's going on here?" Paul asked, his voice dripping with superiority. Samuel stood tall, taking a deep breath. He didn't want to make a scene, but he couldn't let this insult slide. "I have the money to buy the car," he said calmly, pulling out his bank statements from his jacket. His hands trembled, not from age, but from the sting of humiliation. He held them out for Paul to see, his chest tightening with frustration. Paul scanned the documents briefly, then looked up at Samuel with a dismissive expression. "Sir," he said, his voice louder now, deliberately making sure others could hear, "this is a luxury dealership. We cater to a certain caliber of client, and I'm afraid you don't meet that standard." He paused for effect. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're making our real customers uncomfortable." The showroom seemed to go silent, the laughter of the other employees stifled only by the tension in the air. Samuel felt his legs go weak, but he forced himself to stand tall. He looked around, seeing the judgment in the eyes of the people around him, and for a moment, the weight of their disdain threatened to crush him. His mind flashed back to Eleanor, who had always encouraged him to hold his head high, no matter what. With a quiet sigh, Samuel straightened his back, the words of his wife echoing in his mind. Character reveals itself in how you treat those who can do nothing for you. Samuel turned and walked toward the door, but before he left, he paused and turned back to face Paul and the others. "My wife," he said, his voice calm but firm, "believed that true character is shown in how you treat others. Perhaps you should think about that." As he walked out of the dealership, Samuel's heart was heavy, but he was determined not to let this moment define him. He had faced greater challenges in his life and come through them stronger. This, too, would pass. But little did he know, this humiliation would set in motion a chain of events that would forever change the course of his life. As Samuel Hill stepped out of Prestige Motors, the heavy door closing behind him with a quiet thud, a bitter taste lingered in his mouth. He stood on the curb outside, his old briefcase in one hand and his crumpled bank statements in the other, staring at the dealership's shining glass facade as if trying to burn the image of the humiliation into his memory. He had walked into that showroom with a dream, only to be treated like an outsider, someone unworthy of even being in the same room as the luxurious vehicles. The sting of their mockery cut deeper than he had expected, and as he stood there in the cold, late morning air, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. He had spent years working hard, decades of discipline and sacrifice. Samuel had always believed in the value of earning respect. He had never asked for handouts or sympathy, nor had he ever flaunted his modest success. He was the kind of man who measured his worth by the relationships he built, the integrity he upheld, and the quiet pride he took in doing things the right way. But none of that seemed to matter here. The judgment, the condescending tone, and the casual dismissal he had faced were like slaps across the face, leaving him reeling. For a brief moment, the frustration threatened to overwhelm him, and he stood frozen, his gaze fixed on the sleek, expensive cars that gleamed just inside the showroom windows. He had earned the right to buy that car. Hell, he had earned the right to walk through that door as much as anyone else. But it wasn't just the rejection that hurt. It was the way he had been treated, as if his appearance alone was enough to mark him as unworthy of respect. His clothes, his age, the years of hard work etched into the lines on his face, they had all been dismissed in an instant. And for what? Because he didn't look like the kind of person who belonged in a place like Prestige Motors? As his thoughts churned, Samuel's hand clenched around the worn leather strap of his briefcase. The urge to turn back around, to demand an apology, to confront Paul Stevens and Ryan for their arrogance, bubbled up within him. But he quickly swallowed it down. He had learned long ago that nothing was gained from confrontation born out of anger. Samuel knew that the battle wasn't about proving something to them. No, it was about proving something to himself. Taking a steadying breath, Samuel pulled his coat tighter around him and began walking slowly toward his car, parked at the far end of the lot. His mind wandered back to Eleanor. His late wife had always been the emotional anchor of their relationship, the one who reminded him to stay grounded, even in the face of adversity. She had always believed in him, even when the world didn't. She had encouraged him to pursue his investments, even when others doubted him. The way she had smiled at him when he shared his dreams of buying a luxury car had stayed with him through all these years. "You know, Samuel," Eleanor had once said, years ago, "true character is revealed not in the moments of triumph, but in how you treat others, especially when they have nothing to offer you in return." Samuel had never forgotten those words. In the quiet moments of his life, he had repeated them to himself like a mantra. And here he was now, facing the very test Eleanor had warned him about. Driving home that day was an almost mechanical task. His fingers gripped the steering wheel with a sense of numbness, the miles stretching ahead of him like an endless road of quiet reflection. The familiar streets of his neighborhood passed by in a blur, but his mind was elsewhere. Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to change, that what had happened at Prestige Motors was a sign, something that was telling him he needed to take control of his life in a way he hadn't before. Back at home, the house was still and quiet, the way he preferred it. Eleanor's absence was a presence that Samuel couldn't escape, and sometimes it felt like her voice was still there, echoing in the corners of his mind. He sat down in the study, the room filled with memories of their life together. Photos on the walls, old furniture that held sentimental value, and Eleanor's favorite armchair by the window, untouched since she passed away. Samuel wasn't one for pity or self-indulgence, but in this quiet space, surrounded by memories of better times, he allowed himself a moment to grieve. Picking up the phone, he dialed his daughter Clara's number. She was his anchor, the one who always seemed to know what to say when he needed her most. The phone rang a few times before Clara answered, her voice warm and familiar. "Hi, Dad," she said. "How's everything?" Samuel paused, collecting his thoughts before speaking. "Clara, I need to talk to you." Her tone shifted instantly, sensing the gravity in his voice. "What happened? Are you okay?" Samuel took a breath, steadying himself. He told her about the experience at Prestige Motors, about the way he had been treated. He described the dismissive tone, the condescending attitude, and how Paul Stevens had practically thrown him out of the dealership in front of everyone. As he spoke, his voice grew thick with emotion, but Clara listened intently, never interrupting, just letting him express the frustration that had been building inside him since the moment he stepped out of that showroom. "That's awful, Dad," Clara said after a long pause. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. You deserve better." Samuel nodded, though she couldn't see it. "It's not just about the car, Clara. It's about how they treated me. How they assumed that just because I'm an older man, I didn't have the means to buy something I've worked my whole life for. I've spent decades building up to this. And they?" His voice cracked slightly, the hurt still fresh. "They treated me like I didn't matter." "I know, Dad," Clara said gently. "But don't let them get to you. You worked hard for that money, and they don't define your worth." Samuel fell silent for a moment, allowing his daughter's words to sink in. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, a thought occurred to him. An idea so bold that it startled him at first. "What if I told you I could do something about it?" he said, his voice steadier now, a spark of determination rekindling in his chest. Clara was quiet for a moment, then her voice brightened. "What do you mean?" Samuel took a deep breath. "I've been looking into Prestige Motors and their parent company, Apex Enterprises. They're struggling. I think I can buy the dealership. I've got enough savings, and I've made some smart investments over the years. I think I can turn this around." Clara was quiet for a moment, processing his words. "Dad, are you serious? That's a huge step. But I know you've always been good at spotting opportunities. If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, then I'm with you." Samuel smiled for the first time since he left the dealership. His daughter was right. This wasn't just about getting back at them. It was about taking control. It was about showing the world that people like him, people who had worked hard, who valued respect and decency, deserved their place too. "Let's make some calls, Clara," Samuel said, his voice filled with purpose. "I'll show them what respect really looks like." And with that, Samuel's path forward became clear. The humiliation at Prestige Motors had lit a fire within him, a fire that would burn bright and drive him to take the one thing those arrogant salesmen never expected: control. He wasn't going to let this moment define him. He would redefine the rules of the game. The days following his conversation with Clara were filled with a sense of urgency and excitement that Samuel hadn't felt in years. It was as though the frustration of the dealership's treatment had awakened something inside him, a need to prove that he wasn't just another aging man, quietly fading into the background. He wasn't a relic of the past. He still had the fire, the drive, and the ability to make something significant happen. He would not be dismissed. Samuel spent the next few days immersed in research. Every evening, after dinner and his usual solitary walk around the neighborhood, he retreated into his study and pored over financial documents, news articles, and reports about Prestige Motors and its parent company, Apex Enterprises. The more he dug, the clearer it became that he wasn't just chasing a pipe dream. Apex was struggling, and Prestige Motors was one of the jewels that was slowly losing its luster. The dealership was underperforming, the sales figures were below projections, and it was evident that the management team, particularly Paul Stevens and Ryan, had no interest in actually turning things around. At first, Samuel had been hesitant. The idea of purchasing a luxury dealership, especially one with such a poor track record, seemed daunting. But as he sat at his desk, calculating his savings, his investments, and the potential loan options, the numbers began to make sense. He had invested wisely over the years, mostly in tech stocks that had been on a steady rise since the early 2000s, and his portfolio had grown into a small fortune. Samuel had always been careful with money, but now, looking at his assets, he realized that he had more than enough to make an offer. But this wasn't just about money. Samuel knew that he needed a strategy, a plan that would not only allow him to purchase Prestige Motors, but also to turn it into a place where customers were treated with the respect they deserved. He wasn't going to let it become just another business transaction. This was personal. The memory of how he had been treated, the disdain in Ryan's eyes, and the smugness in Paul Stevens' voice had fueled his resolve. He would transform Prestige Motors into a symbol of integrity, a dealership that would be known for its commitment to respect and customer service, not just high-end cars. Clara, as always, was supportive, even if she still couldn't quite believe what her father was proposing. She had seen Samuel succeed in business before, but this was a different challenge, a different kind of risk. She wasn't sure he fully realized just how much work it would take, but she trusted him. She knew her father well enough to know that once he made up his mind, there was no stopping him. "It's a huge leap, Dad," Clara had said when he shared his plans with her. "But if anyone can do it, you can." The next day, Samuel called his old friend, Frank Wilder, a financial advisor who had helped him manage his investments over the years. Frank had always been someone Samuel trusted, someone who understood both the logic and the heart behind a good financial decision. He needed Frank to help him navigate the potential purchase of Prestige Motors. "Samuel, I can't say I'm not surprised," Frank said after hearing Samuel's plan. "But honestly, I'm not surprised either. I've always said you have an eye for opportunity, and this could be one hell of an opportunity." After a few phone calls and a couple of meetings, Samuel had arranged a meeting with Apex Enterprises' corporate headquarters. The sale of Prestige Motors wasn't public knowledge yet, but Samuel had dug deep enough to know that the parent company was looking to unload the dealership due to its ongoing struggles. They were willing to sell it for $4.5 million, far below its true market value, especially considering the land and inventory. The company had been hemorrhaging money for years, and Apex was eager to cut its losses. Samuel knew this was his chance. The day he drove to the corporate office for the meeting, he wore the same suit he had worn to Eleanor's funeral. It was a symbol of his journey, both of the loss he had experienced and the resilience he had cultivated over his life. He had never been a man to chase after flashy appearances, but today, as he walked into the boardroom, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had lived through enough to know when an opportunity was too good to pass up. When Samuel entered the room, the executives of Apex Enterprises greeted him with the kind of forced politeness one might expect from a group of corporate sharks used to dealing with only the wealthiest buyers. Samuel wasn't put off by their condescending stares. He had spent years learning to read people, to see beneath their surface-level facades, and what he saw in the room was a group of people desperate to get rid of a dying asset. Mr. Hill, the CEO of Apex Enterprises, a sharp-dressed man named Gregory Warren, began with a thin smile. "I trust you're aware of the condition of the dealership?" "I'm aware," Samuel said, his voice steady. "I've done my research. I know the dealership is underperforming, but I believe it can be turned around." Gregory raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "And you think you can do that?" "I know I can," Samuel replied without hesitation. "I've seen businesses in worse shape than Prestige Motors make comebacks. With the right management, the right focus on customer service, and the right culture, I believe the dealership can not only survive, but thrive." There was a long pause as Gregory and his team exchanged skeptical glances. Samuel could feel their doubt, but it only strengthened his resolve. This wasn't just about buying a dealership. This was about building something better, something that would outlast the arrogant salespeople who had mistreated him and the corporate culture that prioritized profits over people. "We're asking $4.5 million, Gregory said after a long silence, leaning back in his chair. "But given the state of things, we're open to negotiation." Samuel smiled inwardly. The price was lower than he had expected, and with his investment portfolio and the assets he had accumulated over the years, he was in a strong position to make an offer. "I'm prepared to meet your price," Samuel said, "but I have a condition. The management team at Prestige Motors, Paul Stevens, Ryan, and anyone else involved in the current operation, will need to be let go. I'll be bringing in a new team, one that understands the importance of customer service and integrity." Gregory seemed taken aback, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're asking for a complete overhaul? You do realize that could set back the business even further, don't you?" "I'm not asking for an overhaul," Samuel said evenly. "I'm asking for a fresh start. You can either sell me the dealership and take the loss, or you can continue letting it spiral into the ground. It's your choice, but I think you know which option is the smarter one." After a tense silence, Gregory finally spoke, his tone resigned. "I'll need to discuss it with the board, but we're close enough to a deal. I'll call you in a few days." Samuel shook his hand firmly, his eyes steady. "I'll be waiting." As he left the boardroom, Samuel's heart raced with anticipation. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. The deal wasn't finalized yet, but he could already feel the weight of it in his bones. The transformation of Prestige Motors had begun, and Samuel Hill wasn't just buying a dealership. He was preparing to make a statement. And nothing, not even the condescension of people like Paul Stevens or Ryan, would stand in his way. The morning Samuel received the call from Apex Enterprises felt like the calm before a storm. He had spent the past few days checking and rechecking the figures, mentally preparing for the changes he was about to implement, and planning the new direction for Prestige Motors. He knew that in order to turn the dealership into what he envisioned, he needed a team that was just as passionate about customer service as he was about the business. But there was still one final hurdle to cross: finalizing the sale. When the phone rang, Samuel was sitting in his study, flipping through the paperwork that would soon be his. He saw Gregory Warren's name on the screen and felt a brief flutter of anticipation. He picked up the phone, bracing himself for the inevitable negotiations. "Mr. Hill," Gregory's voice crackled over the line. "We've discussed it internally, and we're prepared to move forward with your offer. The dealership is yours." For a brief moment, Samuel just sat there, letting the weight of those words settle in. He had done it. Prestige Motors was now his, and everything he had envisioned for it, the new culture, the commitment to treating customers with respect, and most importantly, the vindication of standing up to the people who had humiliated him, was now within his grasp. But with that realization also came the full responsibility of what he had just signed up for. The staff at the dealership would need to be informed, the changes implemented, and the mission for the business redefined. He couldn't afford to waste any time. "I'll have the paperwork signed by the end of the day," Samuel said firmly, masking the excitement in his voice. "Let's make sure everything is in order." Gregory agreed, and after a few more logistical details, they hung up. Samuel stared at the phone for a moment, then stood, pacing around the room. Clara would be proud of him. But Samuel knew that the hardest part of this journey was just beginning. It was one thing to buy the dealership. It was another thing entirely to change its culture. He immediately called Clara, who was at her office, and told her the news. She didn't hesitate to congratulate him, but he could hear the excitement and concern in her voice. "Dad, you know this is going to take a lot of work, right? It's not just about firing people and bringing in new faces. You're going to have to rebuild the reputation of Prestige Motors from the ground up." "I know, Clara," Samuel replied, his voice calm and resolute. "And I will. I've seen businesses rise from the ashes before, and I know how to make this one succeed." That afternoon, Samuel walked into Prestige Motors for the first time as the new owner. The glass doors opened with a soft chime as he stepped inside, feeling a strange mix of pride and determination. The showroom was eerily quiet, save for a few scattered employees who were focused on their work, unaware of the impending changes. Blake, the arrogant salesman who had mocked him just days before, was the first to notice him. Samuel could see the confusion on Blake's face as he recognized him from the day of the incident. The cocky smile that Blake had once worn so easily faded into something more uncertain. "Mr. Hill," Blake said, hesitating for a moment, "I wasn't expecting you today." Samuel gave him a cold smile. "You might not have expected me, but you're going to have to get used to seeing me around." He walked past Blake, who seemed unsure whether to challenge him or keep his distance. Samuel's presence alone had already unsettled the man, and Samuel knew that it was only a matter of time before he had to address Blake directly. At the back of the showroom, Paul Stevens, the manager, was standing near the office, speaking with a couple of customers. When he saw Samuel approach, his face immediately twisted into a frown. Samuel had heard plenty about Stevens. The man was arrogant, entitled, and completely disconnected from the kind of leadership that could inspire respect from employees and customers alike. Samuel had already made up his mind that Stevens wouldn't last long. "Mr. Hill, I wasn't expecting you today either," Stevens said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I see you've come to check out your new purchase." "I'm not here to check it out," Samuel said firmly, his eyes locking with Stevens coldly. "I'm here to speak with you and the rest of the staff." Stevens' smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Oh, I see. Well, I'm sure we can discuss anything you'd like, but I don't believe there's any need to make hasty decisions, right? You just bought the place after all. Maybe a little patience would." "Enough," Samuel interjected. "There's no need for pleasantries. I've seen how you've been running things here, and frankly, it's a disgrace. Prestige Motors is no longer in your hands." The words hung in the air, and Stevens' face went pale. For a moment, Samuel thought he might be seeing genuine fear in the man's eyes, but that quickly faded, replaced by a defensive anger. "Wait, what do you mean?" Stevens sputtered, trying to regain control of the situation. "You can't just—" "I'm not asking," Samuel said, cutting him off once more. "This isn't a negotiation. You're done. Effective immediately, you're no longer part of this company. I've already spoken with the board, and we've made our decision." Stevens opened his mouth, but no words came out. His hands began to shake as the reality of the situation set in. Samuel could practically feel the tension in the room, and it was clear that Stevens wasn't used to being on the receiving end of such decisiveness. The rest of the staff, who had been watching the scene unfold with quiet interest, began to stir. The murmurs began, and Samuel could sense the unease in the air. They all knew what was coming, but none of them had expected it to happen so quickly. "Blake," Samuel called out, addressing the salesman who had been standing nervously by the door. "You're next. Pack your things." Blake opened his mouth to protest, but Samuel's sharp gaze silenced him instantly. "You're part of the problem, just like Stevens. You'll both be gone by the end of the day. Don't make this any harder than it needs to be." Blake's face turned white as he began to walk toward his desk. The rest of the staff watched in stunned silence as the two men, who had once been the faces of Prestige Motors, gathered their belongings and left without a word. Once they were gone, Samuel turned to the remaining employees, many of whom had watched the exchange with a mix of apprehension and relief. He knew that the changes would not be easy, but it was necessary. He would have to earn their trust, but he was ready for that challenge. From now on, Samuel said, his voice steady but full of authority, this dealership will be different. Every customer, no matter their background, will be treated with respect. You'll all be part of a new culture, a culture built on kindness, honesty, and integrity. He paused, letting his words sink in. There will be new training, and we will implement a mystery shopper system to ensure that we're always upholding these values. If anyone here isn't on board with that, they can leave now. But if you stay, you'll be part of something special. Prestige Motors isn't just a business. It's going to be a place where people come to feel valued. That starts today. The staff members, some hesitant but most eager for change, nodded in agreement. Samuel could see the spark of hope in their eyes, and it reassured him that he was on the right path. As he turned and walked toward the back office to finish the paperwork for the dealership, a sense of calm settled over him. He had taken the first step toward transforming this place into something meaningful. Now, it was time to show everyone what Prestige Motors could truly be. As the last of the dismissals were finalized and the rest of the staff absorbed the weight of Samuel's words, the dealership suddenly felt like a place on the edge of a transformation, a chrysalis on the verge of becoming something more. Prestige Motors was no longer the same, but the challenge ahead was immense. Samuel understood this fully. He had heard the whispers, felt the skepticism in the air. Employees, even the ones still remaining, were uncertain. Could they really change? Could a dealership with such a tarnished reputation become a place where respect and integrity thrived? Samuel wasn't just determined to prove them wrong. He was going to prove to himself that the vision he had for this place could become a reality. The days that followed were intense. Samuel spent hours going over the employee roster, studying the strengths and weaknesses of each person who had remained. He wasn't just about to replace the leadership. He needed to rebuild the spirit of Prestige Motors from the ground up. He knew this was more than firing a few bad apples. It was about creating a culture where every person, from the janitor to the salespeople, understood the importance of treating customers with dignity. Respect, empathy, and fairness. Those were the cornerstones of his new vision. A week into his ownership, Samuel introduced the first of many changes. He made sure that the showroom floor looked cleaner, more inviting. The lighting was brighter, the cars polished to perfection, but it wasn't the cars that mattered anymore. It was the experience. When customers walked through those doors, he wanted them to feel welcome, heard, and respected. But it wasn't just about appearances. Samuel implemented a mandatory customer service training program that was nothing short of intense. Every employee, regardless of their role, was required to take part. The focus wasn't on sales techniques. No, Samuel knew the best way to sell was to give people an experience they couldn't get anywhere else. The training was designed to help everyone understand that customer service wasn't a transaction. It was a relationship. Samuel's training program wasn't typical. He didn't focus on just greeting customers and making a quick sale. Instead, the training delved deep into understanding the psychology of service, why some customers felt uncomfortable at luxury dealerships, how to handle difficult situations without becoming defensive, and how to listen, truly listen, to what the customer needed. They practiced empathy, patience, and even role-played difficult interactions. The idea was simple. If the staff could connect with customers on a human level, sales would follow naturally. The results weren't immediate, but they were undeniable. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere at Prestige Motors began to shift. The once cold and different employees started smiling at customers, striking up genuine conversations, offering help, not just to those who looked wealthy, but to everyone who walked in. And most importantly, the customers noticed. It didn't take long for the press to catch wind of the sudden transformation. Word spread like wildfire that the dealership had turned over a new leaf, with a new owner who was intent on changing the way things were done in the high-end car sales world. Samuel Hill became a local legend, the man who had taken a business on the brink of failure and turned it into something completely different, a dealership that treated every customer like royalty, regardless of how much money they had in their pockets. Samuel wasn't the type to brag. In fact, he avoided the spotlight as much as he could. But he knew that his actions were speaking louder than any press conference could. As the dealership's reputation grew, he began receiving letters from customers, grateful for the change. Many were people who had previously been turned away from other luxury dealerships because of their appearance or age. They wrote to thank Samuel for showing them that everyone deserved to be treated with respect. But it wasn't just the customers who were affected. Samuel's own staff, those who had remained after the initial purge, began to speak up. They started volunteering their time for community events, helping with local charities, and even attending training programs to further improve their skills. Samuel's leadership had ignited something in them, a sense of pride in what they did. They weren't just selling cars anymore. They were building relationships, changing lives, and making a real difference. One day, about a month after the changes had been implemented, an elderly woman walked into the dealership. Samuel had been in his office, going over some numbers, when he heard the soft chime of the showroom door. He looked up, and his heart sank slightly when he saw her. She was dressed in simple, worn clothing, and she appeared somewhat nervous. The staff had been trained to treat everyone equally, but Samuel knew that some people still judged others based on appearance. Would the staff embrace the new culture or slip back into their old habits? He watched quietly from the office as Rebecca, the young woman who had taken over Blake's position, greeted the elderly woman with warmth and respect. Rebecca didn't seem to notice the woman's modest appearance at all. She smiled and asked her how she could help. The woman looked a little taken aback at first, but Rebecca's kindness quickly put her at ease. "I'm looking for a car for my granddaughter," the woman said softly. "She's graduating soon, and I'd like to get her something special." Rebecca didn't skip a beat. She showed the woman the various options, explaining the features and benefits of each car without ever once making her feel out of place. It was clear to Samuel that the new culture was taking hold. No one was looking down on the elderly woman. No one was dismissing her. They were treating her like a valuable customer, as they would anyone else. As the woman left with a new car ordered for her granddaughter, Samuel smiled to himself. This wasn't just about selling cars. It was about creating a place where people felt seen and heard. It was about changing how people viewed themselves and how they interacted with others. That afternoon, after the sale was complete, Samuel gathered his team together. He wanted to celebrate this moment, this success. "You've done it," he said, standing before the team, his voice filled with pride. "This sale, this moment, it means something special. You've done exactly what I asked. You've treated every customer, no matter who they are, with respect, and that's why we're going to succeed." The room erupted into applause, but Samuel's smile faded as he reflected on the bigger picture. The real challenge had always been about more than just sales. It was about culture. And for the first time, Prestige Motors had that culture. The transformation was real, and it wasn't just in the numbers. It was in the way people treated each other, the way customers felt when they stepped into the dealership. They didn't just buy cars, they left with an experience, a feeling of dignity that had been so long absent from the high-end automotive world. A week later, as Samuel walked through the showroom floor, he caught sight of an old familiar face. It was Gregory Warren, the businessman who had initially sold him the dealership. Gregory was no longer in charge of the sale. It was Samuel's turn to lead. But Samuel had invited him back to see the changes. Gregory hadn't seen it all firsthand, but he was impressed by the success Samuel had achieved in such a short time. "Samuel, I have to admit," Gregory said, his voice low with a hint of regret. "I didn't believe you could pull this off. I thought you'd give up when the going got tough, but you've proven me wrong. This place, it's different." Samuel looked around at the employees, the cars, the smiles on the customers' faces. It wasn't just the dealership that had changed. It was the entire atmosphere. "It's not just about cars or numbers," Samuel replied. "It's about people. When you treat them with respect, they'll return that respect. That's how you build success." Gregory nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You've done more than just turn around a business. You've changed the way people think. And for that, I'll always be grateful." Samuel smiled. The road ahead was still long, but the journey was already proving to be worth every step. As the weeks passed, Samuel Hill's vision for Prestige Motors began to take root more firmly. The once indifferent and cold atmosphere had completely transformed. It wasn't just the polished showroom, the bright lights, or the luxury cars. It was the feeling, a sense of respect and warmth that enveloped anyone who entered the dealership. Customers, regardless of their wealth, felt like they were the most important people in the room. It was this sense of genuine care that set Prestige Motors apart from every other luxury dealership in the area. One morning, as Samuel walked through the showroom, he spotted a familiar face, a woman in her late 60s, wearing a modest dress and a pair of well-worn shoes. She looked hesitant as she wandered between the cars, unsure where to begin. Samuel recognized her from the community, Helen Jenkins, a retired teacher from a local high school. He knew she didn't have the wealth of a typical luxury car buyer, but Samuel had learned by now that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity, especially those who might not have the means to buy a luxury car. Helen looked up as Samuel approached. Her eyes were soft, but filled with an almost apologetic expression, as if she didn't belong. Samuel smiled warmly at her, the smile that had become a signature of his leadership. "Good morning, Miss Jenkins. How can I help you today?" The older woman blinked in surprise, her nerves immediately softened by his kind tone. She hesitated for a moment, as if she were uncertain whether she had the right to be in a place like this. I was just looking," she said, her voice quiet. "I know I'm probably not the type of customer you normally get here, but I wanted to see if I could find something reliable for my granddaughter. She's about to start college, and I just want to make sure she's safe on the road." Samuel could hear the concern in her voice, but more than that, he could feel the hesitation. It was the same hesitation he had once felt when he first walked into Prestige Motors, the same kind of vulnerability that had made him question his worth in that environment. He knew exactly how she felt. "Miss Jenkins," Samuel said gently, "you're exactly the kind of customer we're here to help. Let me show you some options. I promise you, no one will treat you like you don't belong here." Helen's face softened as Samuel led her to a selection of vehicles that would be perfect for her granddaughter. They weren't the flashiest or the most expensive cars, but they were safe, reliable, and a great fit for a young student just starting out. The sale didn't happen that day, but it wasn't about the sale. It was about making Helen Jenkins feel like she mattered. As the months rolled on, Samuel's commitment to maintaining this high standard of service remained unwavering. He saw Prestige Motors as more than just a business. He saw it as a platform for change, a place where people could experience the power of respect and kindness. And slowly but surely, that transformation began to ripple outward, affecting not just the employees, but the community as a whole. It wasn't long before the dealership's reputation reached a wider audience. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. The city's affluent clients, those who would typically shop at competing dealerships, began taking notice of the dramatic shift at Prestige Motors. What had once been seen as a rundown, second-rate dealership was now known for its exceptional service and customer-first mentality. One day, a middle-aged woman walked in, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached one of the salespeople. She looked around, clearly impressed by the showroom, but something in her expression told Samuel that she wasn't just here to browse. She was here on a mission. "Hi," the woman said in a smooth, confident voice. "I'm looking for a car, but not just any car. I need something that represents the success I've worked for, but I also want to know that I'm being treated right. I've heard this is the place to come if you want to be treated with respect." Samuel watched from a distance as the salesperson, Ava, greeted her warmly. Ava was one of the newer team members, but she had quickly adopted Samuel's principles. She didn't look at the woman's expensive clothes or designer handbag and immediately think, "big sale." Instead, she saw a person who had likely faced a lot of prejudice in her life, someone who needed to feel validated before anything else. Ava took the time to listen to the woman's needs and showed her a few options that were within her budget, explaining the benefits of each one. The woman's demeanor softened as Ava spoke to her with the same respect she would give to anyone. The sale wasn't rushed. It was methodical, based on understanding, not pressure. The woman was impressed, not by the cars, but by the genuine service she received. After the sale, Samuel sat with the team for a quick meeting. "Today," he began, We did something amazing. We treated her with the respect she deserved, and because of that, we created a positive experience. She's going to go out and tell people about us, and that's how we grow, not just by selling cars, but by making people feel valued. It wasn't the first time Samuel had held a meeting like this, but today it felt different. There was a shift in the air, a feeling that this was the culture Samuel had dreamed of. And the truth was, it wasn't just about the cars or the sales. It was about respect, the kind of respect that had been sorely lacking in the industry for so long. As Prestige Motors flourished, so did Samuel's sense of fulfillment. He knew that he had turned a moment of humiliation, his own, from years ago, into something meaningful. He had made the world a little better, one customer at a time. And even though Helen Jenkins' sale hadn't happened immediately, he knew it would. He saw her in the showroom occasionally, still browsing, still considering, still trying to find the right car for her granddaughter. He knew that the day she made her purchase would come when she was ready, and when it did, it would be because of the trust he had built with her. Samuel continued to improve the business, adding new initiatives, introducing even more community outreach programs, and working to create a place where everyone felt welcome. He even partnered with local organizations to offer free car maintenance classes for seniors and those in need. One of the most impactful things Samuel did was introduce a scholarship fund for young people interested in automotive careers. Samuel remembered what it was like to work hard for everything he had, and he wanted to give back. He didn't want to just change a dealership. He wanted to change lives. As the first anniversary of his ownership approached, Samuel looked around the showroom floor, watching employees interact with customers. There was no longer any trace of the old Prestige Motors. The store had become a beacon of respect and professionalism, a place where people could come, not just for cars, but for dignity. Samuel knew it was a place that would live on long after he was gone. That evening, as Samuel sat at his desk, a soft knock echoed on the door. It was Rebecca, one of his top salespeople. "Samuel," she said, smiling brightly, "I just wanted to tell you that I've never worked anywhere like this before. You've really changed everything. I've never seen a dealership so dedicated to treating people right, no matter who they are. I'm proud to be a part of this." Samuel smiled back, feeling the weight of her words. This was it. This was his legacy. And in that moment, Samuel realized that the true value of what he had created was not in the profits, not in the cars sold, but in the culture of respect and integrity that would endure for years to come. The next morning, as he walked through the dealership, he made sure to glance at the framed quote his late wife had given him, hanging prominently in the entrance. It was a reminder of what mattered most. Character reveals itself in how you treat those who can do nothing for you. Samuel Hill had built something lasting, something that would outlive the cars and the business itself. And that, he knew, was the greatest success of all. As the months passed, the transformation at Prestige Motors continued to unfold, with Samuel Hill's leadership now solidified as a beacon of integrity in the automotive world. But despite the dealership's growing success and the respect it garnered from the community, Samuel knew that the true test of his values, of everything he had worked for, was yet to come. It would come, not from the praise of customers or employees, but from a new challenge that threatened to undo everything he had worked so hard to build. It came one brisk autumn morning, just as the sun began to peek over the horizon, casting a golden light on the dealership's showroom floor. Samuel was sitting in his office, reviewing the latest financial reports, when his assistant, Margaret, knocked on the door with a look of concern. "Mr. Hill, there's someone here to see you. A man named Victor Rhodes," Margaret said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "He's asking for you, but he seems intense." Samuel raised an eyebrow. He didn't recognize the name, but he had learned not to ignore such warnings. He put down the reports and walked toward the showroom, his mind already racing through the possibilities. Victor Rhodes could be anyone, a disgruntled former customer, a competitor, or someone with an agenda. As Samuel stepped into the showroom, he immediately spotted the man, tall, sharp-featured, and dressed in an expensive tailored suit. He stood by one of the high-end vehicles, inspecting it as if he had all the time in the world. Victor Rhodes was imposing, a figure who carried an air of power and authority, but there was something about his demeanor that suggested an edge of menace beneath the surface. He turned slowly as Samuel approached, and the two locked eyes. "Mr. Hill, I presume?" Rhodes said, his tone smooth but carrying an underlying edge. "I've heard a lot about you. Quite a reputation you've built here." Samuel extended his hand, trying to remain calm despite the sharpness in the air. "Mr. Rhodes, it's a pleasure to meet you. How can I help you today?" Rhodes didn't shake Samuel's hand. Instead, he stared at it for a moment, then let out a soft, almost dismissive chuckle. "You know," he said, stepping forward and placing a hand on the hood of a luxury sedan, "I've been keeping a very close eye on Prestige Motors. I've seen how things have been changing here. You've built quite the empire in a short amount of time." Samuel stood silently, waiting for him to continue. He had learned long ago not to react too quickly, especially when dealing with someone like Rhodes. Rhodes continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And you've really made a name for yourself, haven't you? Transforming this place into some kind of moral high ground. Treating people with respect, regardless of their bank account balance. How quaint." Samuel's instincts flared, but he kept his expression neutral. "We believe in treating everyone with dignity. Regardless of their appearance or background, everyone deserves respect." Victor Rhodes' eyes gleamed with something darker now. "Respect? That's a nice little mission statement. But here's the thing, Mr. Hill," he said, stepping closer, his voice now lowering to a near whisper. "People like you, people who pretend to be saints, well, they're a threat to people like me. I'm not just talking about your customers or your employees either. I'm talking about the big players in this industry." Samuel stood his ground, refusing to let the man's intimidation tactics unnerve him. "What exactly are you implying, Mr. Rhodes?" Rhodes smiled, though there was nothing warm about it. "I represent a group of investors who are very interested in acquiring businesses like yours. We see your success. We see the profits, the growth. But what we don't like is the idea that you're out there preaching this nonsense about respect and integrity. You're giving people the wrong impression, Mr. Hill. You're making it hard for us to do business the way we know it works. So, here's my offer. Sell Prestige Motors to us. I'll make sure you walk away with a nice chunk of change and we'll let you retire in peace." Samuel's heart beat a little faster, but he forced himself to remain calm. This wasn't just a negotiation. It was an attempt to bully him into abandoning everything he had built. "No thanks," Samuel said firmly. "I have no intention of selling, and I'll continue running this business the way I see fit. With respect, integrity, and kindness. I'm not interested in your money." Victor Rhodes' smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. "You don't get it, do you, Mr. Hill? You're a small fish in a big pond. The people who play this game aren't like you. We don't care about your little moral crusade. All we care about is profits. And if you don't play by the rules, you're going to get eaten alive." Samuel stood tall, his resolve hardening. He had been through enough in his life to know what it meant to stand up for what you believe in. He had spent too many years allowing people to walk all over him, to be treated with disrespect and disregard. He wasn't about to let someone like Victor Rhodes break him now. "I don't need your money, Mr. Rhodes," Samuel said quietly, but with absolute certainty. "And I'm not going to sell. Prestige Motors isn't just a business for me. It's a legacy, and I'm not giving it up for anyone, not even you." For a moment, there was silence between them. Then Rhodes let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're making a mistake, Samuel. This is bigger than you. You can't win." Samuel didn't respond. He didn't need to. His calm, unwavering stance spoke for itself. The message was clear. No matter what happened, he wasn't backing down. As Rhodes turned to leave, his expression darkened. "I'll be in touch," he muttered under his breath. "We'll see how long your little utopia lasts." For the next few weeks, Samuel could feel the pressure mounting. Victor Rhodes wasn't someone who gave up easily. Samuel was used to the kind of corporate underhandedness Rhodes represented, but this felt different, more personal. Rhodes wasn't just trying to buy out a business. He was trying to dismantle what Samuel had worked so hard to build. But Samuel wasn't about to let that happen. He doubled down on his efforts. He reminded his employees of their core values every day. He ensured that the dealership's commitment to respect was seen not just in customer service, but in the community too. He introduced new initiatives, such as free car maintenance clinics for seniors and underprivileged families, as well as partnerships with local schools to give students opportunities in the automotive industry. Even as the pressure from Rhodes's investors began to mount, Samuel stood firm. The more they tried to push him, the more determined he became to prove that a business could be successful while maintaining honor and integrity. Then, one morning, Samuel got a call that would change everything. It was from Megan, his accountant. "Samuel," she said, "I've been going over the numbers, and we have a problem. Victor Rhodes and his investors have been quietly buying up shares of Prestige Motors. They've acquired nearly 40% of the company." Samuel's heart sank. He had suspected as much. Victor Rhodes wasn't done with him yet. He knew what was coming next. But Samuel also knew that the fight was far from over. He had faced bigger challenges before, and he was prepared to face this one head on. After all, this was about more than just money. It was about honor, dignity, and proving that respect could withstand even the most formidable pressures. And in the back of his mind, Samuel couldn't help but remember something his late wife had told him years ago. Success is never defined by the size of your fortune, but by the strength of your character. Now, Samuel knew exactly what he had to do. The battle for Prestige Motors had just begun. The call from Megan had left Samuel feeling a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, but most of all, determination. He had built Prestige Motors from the ground up, and he wasn't about to let Victor Rhodes and his investors strip it away from him. The stakes had just escalated dramatically, but Samuel was no stranger to challenges. In fact, he thrived in them. This was the test of his entire career and his life's work. The first thing Samuel did was gather his team, those who had stuck by him from the very beginning. In the sleek, modern conference room at the heart of the dealership, they gathered, the tension palpable in the air. Margaret, his trusted assistant, sat beside him, her usual warmth replaced by concern. The other department heads were present: Jenna, the head of sales, and Martin, the operations manager, among others. Each of them had been part of the foundation that made Prestige Motors what it was today. "All right," Samuel began, his voice steady but commanding. "We have a situation. Victor Rhodes has been quietly buying up shares of our company. He now owns 40% of Prestige Motors. He's trying to take control from within." A murmur rippled through the room. The news hit everyone like a cold splash of water. Samuel's team had worked tirelessly to turn this place into something special, something that represented their values. The thought of someone like Victor Rhodes, with his cold corporate ambition, taking control was unbearable. Jenna was the first to speak up. "What's our next move, Samuel? Are we going to sell out?" Samuel shook his head. "Not in a million years. This dealership means too much to me. It means too much to all of us. We're not giving it up." Martin leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "But Rhodes has been a force in the industry for years. He's powerful. He's not going to back down easily." Samuel locked eyes with Martin, then looked around the room at the faces of those who had supported him through thick and thin. His gaze lingered on Jenna, whose dedication to the dealership was unwavering. On Margaret, whose loyalty had been a constant from day one. They had built something meaningful together, something that went beyond profits. It was about dignity, respect, and honesty. He wasn't going to let one man and a group of investors tear it all down. "We'll do things differently," Samuel said, his voice gaining strength. "We'll turn the tables. Rhodes might have money, but we have something he can't buy: integrity and loyalty. We'll use his own tactics against him, but in a way that serves our purpose. We're going to fight back, not with money, but with our reputation." Jenna raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" Samuel smiled, his mind already racing with ideas. "We've been building a solid foundation in the community. What if we leverage that? We start a public campaign, highlight everything that makes Prestige Motors different. We get our customers, the ones we've helped over the years, to come forward and speak out. If we rally the community, if they see how much we've done for them and how much we believe in the values of respect, then we can apply pressure where it counts. We'll force Rhodes into a corner. He'll have no choice but to sell us back our shares." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed Samuel's plan. It was risky, but it was brilliant. This wasn't just about business. It was about a movement, a revolution of values in an industry that had long been dominated by power-hungry moguls like Victor Rhodes. The success of this plan depended not on money or politics, but on the simple truth that respect and integrity still mattered in a world full of greed. In the weeks that followed, Prestige Motors embarked on an unprecedented journey. Samuel's plan began to take shape. He and his team put together a carefully crafted campaign designed to highlight everything they stood for: honesty, fairness, and respect for every customer, no matter their background. They launched a series of online videos featuring real-life testimonials from customers. Stories of how Prestige Motors had helped them find the right car, treated them with dignity, and gone above and beyond to make them feel valued. The campaign was a hit. Local news outlets picked up the story, interviewing satisfied customers who had been treated with kindness and respect when they walked into the dealership. Social media buzzed with positive reviews, with customers sharing their experiences, not just of buying cars, but of how Prestige Motors had become a place where everyone felt welcomed, valued, and respected. Samuel made it a point to appear in the media himself, sharing the story of how Prestige Motors had come to be, how he and his team had dedicated themselves to creating a culture of care in an industry that often overlooked such values. The message was clear. This wasn't just a business. This was a legacy built on principles that could not be bought. Meanwhile, Victor Rhodes was not pleased. His attempts to buy more shares were thwarted as Samuel's campaign gained momentum. The more people rallied behind the dealership, the more Rhodes's efforts to undermine Samuel's vision backfired. Public sentiment was turning against him, and with it, his plans for a hostile takeover began to unravel. Samuel and his team worked tirelessly to keep up the momentum. They held community events, offering free car repairs for seniors and hosting career days for local high school students interested in the automotive industry. They built relationships with local charities and businesses, creating a network of support that made Prestige Motors more than just a dealership. It became a hub of positive change in the community. In a surprise move, Samuel invited Victor Rhodes to attend one of these events, a fundraiser for local schools. He knew that bringing Rhodes into the heart of their work would force him to confront the very thing he had been trying to destroy: the human connection that Prestige Motors had forged with its customers. Rhodes's disdain for the community, for anything that wasn't centered around profit, became more apparent than ever. As the fundraiser unfolded, Samuel watched from across the room as Victor Rhodes attempted to mingle, but his icy demeanor and lack of real connection to the people around him were painfully obvious. The contrast between him and Samuel, who was surrounded by familiar faces, was stark. At the end of the evening, as the event wound down, Samuel made his way over to Rhodes, who was standing near the door, clearly eager to leave. "I hope you've had a chance to see what Prestige Motors stands for," Samuel said, his voice calm but firm. "You may have money, but we have something far more valuable: respect, trust, and a community that believes in us." Rhodes sneered, but Samuel wasn't finished. "And that's something you'll never be able to buy." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Rhodes, for the first time, seemed to lose his usual air of confidence. He could feel the ground slipping from under him. Prestige Motors wasn't just a business, it was a movement, and it had already won the battle for the hearts of its customers. As the days went on, the pressure continued to mount on Victor Rhodes. His efforts to buy out Samuel were growing more desperate, but every time he tried, the community's support for Prestige Motors grew stronger. The board of investors who'd been backing him began to see the writing on the wall. Samuel's company wasn't just a local dealership. It was a symbol of something bigger, something more powerful than money. It wasn't long before Samuel received the call he had been waiting for. It was from one of Rhodes's main backers, an investor who had quietly watched the campaign unfold from the sidelines. "We're selling our shares," the investor said flatly. "We've decided that Prestige Motors isn't just another business. It's something special. We won't be part of something that goes against the values we've always believed in." In that moment, Samuel knew that he had won. He had turned the tables on Victor Rhodes, not with money, not with power, but with integrity. As the months passed, Prestige Motors continued to thrive. Rhodes, having lost his bid for control, disappeared from the public eye. Samuel's reputation and the legacy of the dealership remained intact. And as Samuel sat behind his desk, reviewing the progress they had made, he smiled, remembering what his late wife had always told him. Success isn't about winning at all costs. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. And in that moment, Samuel knew that he had done exactly that. The sun was setting as Samuel stood in his office, looking out at the sprawling dealership below. The once quiet and unassuming Prestige Motors was now a beacon of success, a testament to his relentless pursuit of values over profits, dignity over disdain. The road to this point had been long and arduous, full of hurdles, but it had been worth every challenge, every sacrifice. Samuel felt an overwhelming sense of pride in the transformation he had led, not just in the business, but in the lives of the people it touched. But more than anything, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment in knowing that Prestige Motors had become more than just a place to buy cars. It had become a community pillar, a place where people of all walks of life were treated with respect, dignity, and warmth. A place where character mattered above all. A few weeks earlier, when Samuel had received the final documents confirming the transfer of shares and the closure of Victor Rhodes's involvement, it had felt like a victory. But it wasn't just the legal paperwork that mattered. It was what had happened in the hearts and minds of the people, both within the dealership and beyond. Samuel had seen it in the faces of his employees, their expressions no longer clouded by uncertainty, but filled with hope and renewed pride. People who had once feared for their jobs, uncertain of what was coming next, were now eager to work harder, to contribute to the cultural revolution Samuel had sparked. The difference was palpable, and it was more than just the influx of positive press or rising sales. It was a shift in mindset. The sales team, once skeptical and caught up in the ruthless competition of the car business, now approached each interaction with customers differently. They didn't see dollars and commissions first. They saw individuals, people with stories, with needs, with lives beyond the transactions. Personal connections were being made, and in turn, customers were returning, not just because of the cars, but because of how they felt when they walked through the door. Even the most seasoned members of the team who had been part of the old cutthroat culture now found themselves challenging their old ways of thinking. They would ask, what would Samuel do? Before making any decision. His philosophy had seeped into the very fabric of the company, and it was impossible to ignore. Respect, empathy, and authenticity had become their guiding principles. And then there were the customers. Samuel was in the showroom one afternoon when a familiar face walked through the doors. Betty, the elderly widow, who had been one of the first to speak out in support of the dealership's values during the early days of the campaign. She had been one of the first to share her story, the story of how she had been treated with kindness and patience when she came in to purchase a car, how she had been welcomed as more than just a customer. She had been made to feel like family. She had been so touched by the experience that she had come back to buy a second car for her daughter. Samuel smiled when he saw her. He recognized her instantly, even from across the room. She had become a symbol of what Prestige Motors represented, a shining example of how far Samuel and his team had come. "Betty," Samuel called, his voice warm. "It's so good to see you again." Betty smiled, her eyes twinkling behind her glasses. "I thought I'd stop by and say thank you, Samuel. You've really made a difference here. This place isn't just a dealership anymore. It's a place where people can feel at ease, where they're treated with dignity, and where they know their business matters." Her words were the embodiment of everything Samuel had worked so hard to build. He hadn't just changed the business model. He had changed the way people thought about customer service, about community, about what really mattered. His success wasn't in the number of cars sold or the profits made. It was in the fact that people now walked into Prestige Motors not feeling like they had to prove themselves, but feeling like they belonged. As Betty sat down to finalize her second purchase, Samuel took a moment to look around the showroom. He couldn't help but smile at the sight. There was no longer any tension, no sense of discomfort between the employees and customers. Conversations were light, laughter echoed across the room, and everyone seemed to be genuinely enjoying the process. Samuel had seen the dealership undergo dramatic change, both internally and externally. But this was the moment it truly hit him. The legacy he had envisioned was unfolding before his eyes. Later that afternoon, as Samuel walked through the dealership floor, he was greeted by a new face, a young woman named Laura, who had just joined the team as an assistant manager. She was fresh out of college, full of enthusiasm, and eager to make her mark. When she shook his hand, her smile was genuine, her handshake firm. "Samuel, I've heard so much about you," Laura said, her voice filled with respect. "I've been watching everything you've done with this place, and I just want to say, thank you for setting an example of what true leadership looks like. It's rare to find a company like this, where people are actually treated like human beings, not just sales targets." Samuel's heart swelled with pride. He had worked hard to create a culture of respect. But to hear someone like Laura, young, bright, and full of potential, speak so highly of the work they were doing made all the struggles worthwhile. This was more than just a business. It was a movement, a change that was rippling through the industry and inspiring others to follow suit. "I'm glad to have you on the team, Laura," Samuel said, giving her an encouraging smile. "It's people like you who will carry this vision forward." And then, just as he was about to leave for the day, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Megan, his wife, who had been by his side through every step of the journey. Megan's message: "Proud of you, Samuel. You've done it. You've built something that will last." As Samuel read her words, he felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. She had been his rock, his constant support, even when things seemed impossible. He knew that without her belief in him, without her encouragement when he doubted himself, none of this would have been possible. As the day wound down and the dealership began to empty out, Samuel stood in the showroom, his eyes lingering on the framed quote that hung above the entrance. "Character reveals itself in how you treat those who can do nothing for you." It had been his late father's favorite saying, a guiding principle that had stayed with him throughout his life. Now, it was the foundation of everything Prestige Motors stood for. He walked past it one last time, heading for the door. But before he left, he paused for a moment, looked around at the still showroom, and smiled. The battle for Prestige Motors had been hard fought, but it was now more than just a business. It was a legacy. And in the end, it wasn't about the cars or the profits. It was about the people. Samuel's phone buzzed again. This time, it was from Betty, the elderly widow. Betty's message: "I just wanted to tell you again how grateful I am. I can't imagine ever going anywhere else. You've changed the way I see businesses, and I know you've changed so many lives here. Thank you." "Thank you." Samuel smiled, feeling the weight of her words. He put the phone down and turned off the lights, his mind at peace. The road had been difficult, but he had built something that would endure, something that would stand the test of time. And as he walked out of the showroom, closing the door behind him, he knew one thing for sure. He had truly changed the world, one customer at a time. The moon hung high in the night sky as Samuel made his way down the quiet street towards his home. The usual hum of city life had quieted, replaced by the serene stillness of the late evening. He hadn't realized how much the weight of the day had worn on him until now, walking home in the peaceful solitude that came after a day's work. As he approached his front door, he felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. A lifetime of struggle and perseverance had led him to this moment, a moment of clarity, a moment of peace. The transformation of Prestige Motors was more than just about business. It was about his own personal redemption. It was about karma and the quiet satisfaction that comes from doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. Just then, Samuel's phone buzzed again. He didn't need to look at it to know who it was. His eyes softened as he unlocked the door and entered his home. It was a message from his son, Elliot. Elliot's message: "I'm proud of you, Dad. Mom would be too. You did it. You showed them what real leadership is." A lump formed in Samuel's throat. He had always known his son was proud of him, but hearing those words meant more than anything. Elliot had been a young man when Samuel first started this journey, and now, years later, his son was an accomplished man in his own right, someone Samuel admired and respected deeply. He took a deep breath, letting the message sink in. Elliot was right. Samuel had done it. He had not only turned a business around, but had turned a culture around, breathing life into a place that had been suffocated by greed and arrogance. And in doing so, he had secured a future for everyone involved. A future where people came first, profits second. The next morning, Samuel arrived at the dealership early, as he always did. But today was different. It wasn't just another day at work. Today marked the one-year anniversary of the day he had bought Prestige Motors, and everything had come full circle. The moment Samuel stepped through the front door, he was met by an overwhelming sense of pride. The showroom gleaming, the staff moving with purpose, and the customers browsing the cars with ease. No longer did they feel like they had to prove themselves to be worthy of service. It was a space where they were valued, where they felt like family. There was an undeniable hum of energy in the air, something that couldn't be faked. It was real. The legacy Samuel had been working towards for so long was now a living, breathing thing, stronger than he could have ever imagined. His first stop was the sales floor, where he was greeted by a familiar face, Sophie, the senior sales manager who had been with the company for years. She had been one of the first to embrace Samuel's vision when he came on board. Her once skeptical attitude had been replaced by a fierce belief in what they were building. "Morning, Samuel," Sophie said, her voice brimming with energy. "Got a busy day ahead. We've got a few big sales lined up, and the atmosphere here, well, it's just amazing." Samuel smiled at her, proud of how far they'd come. "It's all because of you, Sophie. Your commitment to treating every customer with dignity has made all the difference." She beamed. "It's been a team effort, but I couldn't have done it without you." Samuel nodded and turned to the customer service desk, where Nathan, the young assistant manager, was helping an elderly couple with a question about financing. Nathan, who had only joined the team a few months ago, was already excelling in his role. His enthusiasm and genuine care for customers had made him a perfect fit for the company's new culture. "I'm just doing my job," Nathan said when Samuel approached, but his pride was evident. "I want to make sure everyone who walks through that door feels valued. You know, the way you taught us." Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. "That's exactly why you're here, Nathan. Keep it up." As the day went on, Samuel's mind drifted back to the first day he had walked into the dealership, the day he had been humiliated, the day he had been told that his dream was out of his reach. Back then, Victor Rhodes and his underlings had mocked him, belittled him, and treated him like he didn't belong. The pain of that moment had stayed with him for so long, but now, with everything he had built, that pain had turned into something else, a lesson. It wasn't about revenge. It was about something deeper. Samuel had transformed the humiliation he had suffered into a tool for change. He hadn't just bought a dealership, he had created a legacy built on the principle that respect, kindness, and authenticity were the cornerstones of success. And in doing so, he had given people the chance to experience the kind of service they deserved. He had shown them that everyone, no matter their age, appearance, or wealth, could be treated with dignity. Later in the afternoon, as Samuel sat in his office, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Cross?" It was Kelly, the new PR manager, her voice light and eager. "You have a visitor in the showroom. I think you'll want to see this." Samuel stood up and followed Kelly down to the showroom. The moment he stepped into the room, he saw the familiar face of Betty, the elderly widow, standing by a car, her expression one of quiet contemplation. But there was someone else with her, someone Samuel hadn't expected to see. It was Victor Rhodes. Samuel's heart skipped a beat, but his expression remained neutral. Victor Rhodes was standing with his head slightly bowed, his demeanor humble in stark contrast to the arrogant man Samuel had once known. "Samuel," Betty greeted him warmly, her smile genuine. "I thought you'd like to meet someone." She gestured to Victor, who was now standing before Samuel, hands clasped in front of him. Victor cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mr. Cross, I owe you an apology." Samuel's brow furrowed slightly, but he said nothing. "I was wrong," Victor continued, his voice steady but with a hint of regret. "I was wrong to treat you the way I did, to treat anyone the way I did. I see now that you were right. Character is what truly matters. I've learned that the hard way." The words were heavy, and Samuel could sense the genuine remorse in Victor's voice. The man who had once been so prideful, so full of himself, was now standing before him, humbled. It was a rare thing for someone like Victor to admit their faults, but there it was. Karma had come full circle. "I've lost my job," Victor said quietly. "I've been working at a small dealership, trying to rebuild my life. I've learned a lot, but I know I still have much to learn. I just wanted to thank you for showing me what true leadership looks like, for showing me what real respect means." Samuel studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "We all make mistakes, Victor, but the real test is whether we learn from them. I hope you've learned your lesson." Victor nodded, a grateful smile flickering across his face. "I have." As Samuel looked at the scene before him, the elderly widow, the humbled former antagonist, and the atmosphere of mutual respect in the dealership, he realized something profound. This was more than just a business. It was a movement. Samuel had created something that would endure, something that would outlive him. And as he looked at Betty, who had been part of the change from the beginning, he knew that his legacy was no longer about proving others wrong. It was about making sure that no one would ever have to face the kind of humiliation he had once endured. As the day drew to a close, Samuel walked out of the dealership, his heart light and full of hope for the future. He had built something that mattered. And in the end, that was all that really mattered. Thank you so much for watching the entire story. We hope you found this tale of revenge, karma, and transformation as inspiring as we did. It's a powerful reminder that no matter how difficult things seem, character and dignity always prevail in the end. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you more powerful content like this. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an inspiring story. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next video.